Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Respected brothers, elders, mothers and sisters, friends, and even our foes. Hope everyone's doing good, inshallah. And alhamdulillah, it's been a little bit of a time, bit of a trek since our last podcast because trust me, I've been very busy, a lot of things on the cards. But alhamdulillah, I got a special guest who's someone who I've been known about for a long period of time. I've been wanting to meet him. And subhanallah, we were having a chat and I thought, you know what, some of the stuff we were talking about should have been saved for the podcast and just jump into recording rather than having our private conversation. So we have with us respectful brother, our brother Ismail Ibrahim. I would like to refer to him as Shaykh Ismail Ibrahim. And we'll talk a little bit about, inshallah, his life, education, but particularly some of his interests, inshallah. And I hope and pray this can be a benefit to myself, to you, and inshallah for the wider ummah, and for inshallah people who are interested in some of the discussion to follow. Without taking any time, inshallah, I'm going to jump straight into this, Shaykh, and say firstly, Jazakallah for accepting our invite. I appreciate you coming, taking the time out. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to meet you, mashallah. And alhamdulillah, I hope and pray that we can meet each other again, bi'idhnillah. How was your journey down? Let's start with that.
Jazakallah wa alaikum salam. Yeah, alhamdulillah, it was fine. Yeah, so I live up north, but it's actually only 2-hour train journey from where I live. So alhamdulillah, we're well connected to London. So, and I'm actually regularly in London to teach and even I work here, even though I work from home, but I'm connected to London in more ways than one. Most of my family here, my mother's side, they're all from London as well. So I spent 5 years in London. So alhamdulillah. So
when did you when did you kind of move back officially? Because you're from Dewsbury, innit?
Yes.
Originally. So when did you kind of come and move back to London?
So after I finished from Medina,
yeah,
I was at University of London, SOAS.
SOAS, yep.
So I was here for 1 year, and then I stayed for another 4 years. So in South London. So total of 5 years I was in London before I moved back to Yorkshire.
Yeah. When did you officially move back?
2012.
So you graduated from Medina in 2007.
2013, sorry. Yeah, I finished in 2007, Medina.
Yep.
SOAS 2008, and then another 4 years I stayed. So
you did a master's in SOAS, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's something I was going to ask you about a little bit, inshallah. But what I want to ask you, obviously, a little bit about your early years. I know that in listening to another podcast, I don't want to reinvent the wheel and ask you all the same questions because, mashallah, some of that content is there. But alhamdulillah, from what I understand, mashallah, you went to Hajj, you went to Mina. It was when you came back from there, your pops went to, was it Dewsbury Madrasa? The Sabbletown one, to get admission.
Yes.
That was a specific one where he argued your case to get in.
No.
That wasn't that one?
That was in Maktab,
okay.
Hifz class.
Hifz class, okay. So that wasn't, I was thinking that was Sabbletown, Dewsbury, the Madrasa.
No, this is nearby mosque, Masjid Umar in Dewsbury, yeah.
And then you completed your Hifz there. That's when you went to study the Alamiyya in specifically Dewsbury.
I started
there.
in 98.
MashaAllah, 98. Alhamdulillah. You was at the age at the time 13.
13, yes. So from 98 to 2003, I finished 6 years of what was and still is, I think, an 8-year course.
Yeah, I do believe they haven't changed it as far as I remember.
Yeah.
They had last year. Yeah, that's right. I'm not going to go into that because I'm not
fully
acquainted with this.
I would have finished in 2005 if the Alimiyya course there. But I moved, obviously. But all my colleagues, they finished in 2005 from Dewsbury.
And how many years were you in Medina for?
4 years. So I skipped the Arabic 2-year mandatory course because I knew Arabic already.
Alhamdulillah.
So 2003 to 2007. I studied Kulliyatul Sharia.
Yep.
Which for those who aren't acquainted with Sharia is a specialization in fiqh and usul.
Yeah.
And also subjects like qada and siyasa Sharia. They all fall under Sharia.
Yeah.
So
my question was, in looking into that a little bit, what made you choose the Kulliyatul Sharia over, say, the faculty of Hadith or the faculty of Tafsir or Kulliyatul Da'wah, the faculty of Da'wah and Propagation? Why specifically the Sharia?
Yeah, there's Kulliyatul Quran as well.
Kulliyatul Quran, okay.
I initially applied for Kulliyatul Quran.
Okay.
Then I changed fairly early on to Kulliyatul Sharia before we started studies. The reason I applied for Kulliyatul Quran was because there's a dearth of students, especially foreign students, going to Kulliyatul Quran, so I thought I would get a better opportunity when I was initially applying to Medina University to get in, and I did get in, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, they're flexible in terms of if you want to change Kulliyah. So I changed to Sharia. The reason I changed to Sharia was because of its reputation within the university that it's more flexible. There's a broader allocation of subjects that are taught to students.
Yeah.
There's not a hyper specialization on Sharia subjects as opposed to Hadith, where there is a hyper specialization in Hadith and Quran. Also, there's a hyper specialization in Ulum al-Quran and Qira'at. Kulliyatul Lugha, there's no need for me to do that. It's mainly for Saudi students who want to go into teaching secondary schools. And then there's Kulliyatul Da'wah, which had a reputation of being a bit easygoing. So I thought Sharia was the best in terms of acquiring a broader range of subjects, getting that specialization in Sharia, in fiqh and usul, and also the student population of Sharia was the biggest. So that made the decision for me that I should change to Sharia. Now, obviously, this was back then when Medina University was focused solely on the Islamic disciplines.
Define disciplines. What do you mean?
Disciplines? So the Dawah disciplines, the Quranic sciences, the Hadith disciplines, Sharia, as I just highlighted, and Arabic language. Just as I was graduating, they introduced new kulliyat, so non-religious subjects like Kulliyatul Taqniya, Kulliyatul Tib, Kulliyatul Handasa, on all these things. So at the time, Medina University was the only Saudi university that focused specifically on Islamic sciences. So there was a bit of pushback from some scholars there. But it came to pass that Medina University also became a mixed studies university. So.
Interesting point. So I never knew this. So traditionally, al-Qura and these sort of universities, they've always offered dual education. It's only Medina that was the specialization in Islamic studies. Okay, I never knew that. SubhanAllah. I had always just never looked into it, but I just made an assumption for some reason that al-Qura was khalis, yani it was a pure Islamic studies university. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it. I just made an assumption for some reason.
Yeah, and the senior most scholar there, and who's still alive, shaykhabdulmajid al-Abbad, he wrote an open letter to whomever stating that this should remain an Islamic sciences only university. Obviously, his advice wasn't heeded too, but this was the sentiment back then, that Medina University should remain an Islamic only sciences university.
What's your opinion on, I mean, this is a question that just come to my mind. With the change of the handasa, yani the engineering, the medical students coming in, have you noticed any change, or does that not really affect the Islamic side? Because sadly, if I may interject, what I noticed, sadly, I don't want to mention too much about this negatively, but in Pakistan, in one university, without naming and shaming, they allocated a lot of funds to the education of yani Tib and Handasa and these things, but when it came to the Islamic studies, it was like some far block, rundown building, and it was, unfortunately, you could see the comparison like night and day. Has there been any of that, or any?
There's few things. Firstly, obviously, I graduated and I left, so I'm not as aware of the shifting dynamic in the university there. But there was even when I was there for the 4 years, there was always a changing dynamic within the education that was imparted to us. So there was a lot of dilution and watering down of the Islamic subjects.
Okay.
Things that were taught for the whole 4 years, they cancelled it, and they only taught it for the first 2 years or the first 3 years, like Arabic, Aqidah, and stuff like. Even the fiqh was watered down within Kulliyatul Sharia, as I felt. Saudi has been going through a radical shift within the past 2 decades, I feel. Islamic sciences are being relegated to the background, to be honest. And it comes down to the economy.
Okay.
Islamic sciences or Islamic discipline students don't generate that much revenue for the economy as other students would do. Yeah. That's the blatant truth.
Yeah, it's the reality.
Saudi students, I believe, are now charged for their Islamic education before everybody was on a scholarship.
Okay.
So already you can see there's a disincentivizing of students to go towards the Islamic sciences. it's not something that's said, but it's a reality that the reason why not only Medina University, but universities in general within Saudi Arabia, why they invite so many students on a scholarship to study is basically to influence the Islamic world or the Muslim world in general with the Saudi way of thinking.
Yeah.
That's a blatant truth. And this is why after graduation, a lot of students go into Maktabud Da'wah work. So you have the Saudi attaches within each country, or major countries where Saudi wants to keep its influence. So there's a lot of graduates who are on the payroll of the Saudi Ministry of Religious Affairs, which is not a bad thing, which is fine, but a man needs to earn. But they don't fund these activities within less strategically important countries. So you only have people who are on the payroll within the UK, USA, Nigeria, South Africa. These are important countries for Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, India. You won't find Maktabud Da'wah employees within countries like, say, Cambodia or some certain Latin American countries. So that's the and even within the education, this is a slightly different point but related. Even within the education, we are taught Saudi history, which isn't relevant within all the kulliyat.
Okay.
So Tarikhul Mamlaka, as they say, the history of Saudi Arabia, how it came about, and obviously it's a very embellished picture that's portrayed to students.
Right.
How they were oppressed by the Ottomans.
So they don't mention Sharif of Makkah and this sort of stuff.
There's no mention of that.
Okay.
So it's only after graduation and after extensive reading where you come to realize there's another side to this whole thing.
Yeah.
How Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, alayhi rahma wal ghufran, how his da'wah came about, and all these things which aren't really mentioned, which you come to realize later on. So that's the dynamic of education. So it's not. So you can't say it's an agenda-less education that's been imparted by the universities there, headed up by obviously the Wazaratul Ta'lim al-Ali, higher education ministry. But you can clearly see there's an agenda behind the education there. So it's not something that you immediately realize when you study there, but it's something I hope students come to realize later on after they graduate, that there's always some sort of agenda behind why decisions are taken this way, why decisions are not taken a certain way, etc., etc.
And is there a particular a government, like a wazara or like a particular organization that decides what is going to be promoted, or is that kept kind of quiet? Is it something I can look up and see what sort of things are they pushing more, or is that not public information?
Well, it's not like in terms of public consultation, there's not really any public consultation going on. The decisions are taken at top level. It's a very top-down approach. It's a top-down society as it is.
Yeah.
And you might have seen recently that Saudi Arabia is now banning books from certain scholars, books of certain topics across the higher education scene. So even certain books by Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, even certain books by Shaykh Albani. You can see the books by scholars who are heavily associated with Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun. Good books, by the way, which are being banned. So you can obviously see in the later years, especially, that shift from religion to secularization, and the desire of the state to not want any Islamic political influence within the educational space and within the political scene within Saudi Arabia. It's shifted more towards an authoritarian approach within the kingdom. And it's unfortunate, really. Everyone can see what's going on in Saudi Arabia right now. Yeah. So now you can see there's a weird. There's like it's like two separate worlds, to be honest. You have the traditional scholars and the universities that teach Islamic education on the one side, and on the other side you have the whole tourism, entertainment, sports industry, which is on the other side, and they're both living side by side, and they're slowly but surely coming into a violent clash with one another. And I really don't see how these two entities can coexist with one another. So wallahu alam what the future for Saudi Arabia holds for us, but it's ominous, to say the least.
That's quite interesting. Subhanallah, I never knew. It's quite an interesting point. This is something which came to mind, and wallahu alam. I mean, I normally like to, my stance is I like to have different people coming on. I like to have a discussion from various different backgrounds, and by asking this question, I don't want to further fan the flames of ikhtilaf. But what I've noticed that within the recent years, I was growing up in the late 80s and then early 90s, and there was a very kind of the arguments were very based on, not arguments, but the kind of clashes were based around fiqh. Like this fiqh isn't right, this fiqh is more right, and we saw a push in that. But now I would notice as far back as I can remember, I wouldn't go back as far as about 5 years, 6 years, I could be wrong, maximum decade, that now for some reason Asha'ira, Maturidiyya, and the Atharis, or the Ahlul Hadith, if you want to label it like that, there seems to be a lot of discussion as whose Aqidah is right and this, that. Do you I don't want to point fingers, but it seems to be coming from certain quarters. Are these the sort of flames that are being fanned? I mean, or am I grossly wrong in even thinking that? Do you get where I'm coming from?
Fanned by...
It seems nowadays? Online, like this. I think this ikhtilaf has not come out of nowhere. These ikhtilaf have always been there.
Yeah.
If you read the books of Aqidah, people hold certain stances, and we this has been historic from since obviously back in the time of from Imam Ahmad onwards. But there just seems to be it's like now the criteria is, firstly, are you part of the Ahlul Sunnah or are you part of Asha'ira Maturidiyya? It's like they've completely just been ruled out.
Yeah.
Is this narrative also one of those things that is being fanned by, like, for example, now the du'at who are perhaps being funded? Or is that too much of a sinister thing to even think at the moment?
Du'at who are funded?
Like, where's the ikhtilaf coming from? Like, why is it so important now, all of a sudden? Like, is this the new kind of trend to kind of, to maintain that sort of dominance in the Islamic field and the identity? Do you get where I'm coming from?
I mean, definitely you can see, we saw these Aqidah issues being flamed up within the 80s, 90s, noughties. What's the provenance of that? Definitely Saudi education had a role to play. There's a number of factors at play here. So you had the Saudi graduates going across the world and interfering with the ecosystem, let's put it that way. So you had Saudi students going to Turkey, Saudi students going to China, going to sub-Sahara Africa, where you already had let's talk about fiqh for now. We'll defer Aqidah for a moment. So you have all these Saudi graduates from Saudi universities going to places where the Maliki madhab is already established, where the Hanafi madhab is already established, where the Shafi madhab is already established. And they're upsetting the fiqh ecosystems in those countries. So that is one cause of friction which didn't need to happen.
Yeah.
To what extent can you blame the Saudi education system for that? I would say to a certain extent, yes, you can blame the Saudi fiqh education system. But with that said, the Saudi education system was always primarily geared for Saudi students living in that Saudi ecosystem. So it doesn't upset the ecosystem there, the religious mindset there. And to be honest, just as a side point, Medina University and other Saudi universities tend to get a very bad rap within, externally, especially by Hanafis from the subcontinent and various quarters across the Muslim world. But in reality, Medina University, Al-Qura University, their Islamic religious education is a blessing for Saudi Arabia. Without them, we don't know where Saudi would have been. And thanks to the efforts of, to be honest, for all their faults, kings like Malik Faisal and Malik Khalid, and even if you go as far back as Malik Abdulaziz, having the Islamic education in the forms of these universities within Saudi Arabia is a blessing for Saudi Arabia. Without that, we don't know where Saudi would have been, to be honest. Okay, so coming back, so you can lay the blame to an extent on higher education within Islamic universities in Saudi Arabia on upsetting the fiqh ecosystems across the world. And you can see it up to this day, even when those Hajj pamphlets and Hajj manuals are published by the Saudi Maktabud Da'wah.
Yeah.
There might be elements within those pamphlets or those booklets that go against what they've already studied in their home countries with regards to how Hajj is to be performed. So that's another point of clash within or upsetting the fiqh ecosystem. And there's many other of these mini flashpoints where you can say Saudi could have been more strategic and more better in terms of how they educate students within universities, that fiqh isn't as serious of an issue as some teachers make out to be. So that's on the fiqh side.
Yeah.
Now on the aqidah side, yes. So if you have an education system which glorifies a certain or lionizes a certain method of theological thinking, and then that graduate is going to go back to their home country, his home country, and they're going to start preaching that way in a manner that upsets the local theological ecosystem, then obviously that's going to inevitably bring about clashes. Now, there's different ways of looking at this. Certainly in some countries, the theological state of Muslims is so bad that you do need some shake-up of the system. You can't have like the Prophet ﷺ, when he went when he was giving da'wah to the kuffar of Makkah, we're not going to say that he upset the ecosystem. That was a requirement. So one needs to take into balance what the requirements of the people are and what needs to be prioritized and what doesn't need to be prioritized. So, but as I said, within universities, there's certainly a push within, when I was there at least, a push within on the part of many teachers, not all of them I would say, but many teachers, to cast out the Ash'aris and the Maturidis from the fold of Ahlus Sunnah. And that's their pejorative.
I would say not only push out. I mean, some people are going as deep as to say these are Ahlul Bid'ah. To sit with them is not permissible. I mean, some people say this is the criterion for marriage even. Like, you can't get married within... If someone has a Ash'ari leaning, Maturidi leaning, then you can't even make nikah with them. I mean, that's how deep it's going. I think it's getting messy. I mean, this is... I don't know, man. And this seems to be more within the past 5-6 years. Like, where did it just suddenly spring up from? Like, I mean, it's always been there, Shaykh. You get me? But it's like all of a sudden it just seems like
this is an age-old problem. It's nothing new.
Yeah.
Even the marriage issue, even the Maturidis classically denied their daughters to get married to Ash'ari men.
Subhanallah. That's
over the whole issue of the mas'ala of al-istithna fil iman. So there's a theological issue of saying ana mu'minun insha'Allah. Is that valid or not? So according to the I believe according to the Ash'aris, that's disallowed. That's allowed. According to Maturidis, this is disallowed because that's like doubting your faith. I am a mu'min inshallah. So on this basis, you'll find in classical Central Asian Hanafi fiqh texts that we can't let our daughters marry Ash'ari Shafi'i men. So it's not a new issue. It's across the board. So
subhanallah. It's a bleak subject. I mean, why is it bleak in the sense that I don't think people have the humble to even appreciate these nuances. And that's where the sensitivity is. I beg your pardon, I've cut your train of thought. It's just I was sitting there biting my tongue. It's like, It's like I just see a mad polarization. Now, don't get me wrong. I appreciate that within the circles of ulama and ahlul ilm, these discussions can and should take place. I'm saying like you got next man coming online, right, firing up a TikTok saying Ash'ira ahlul bid'ah, Maturidi ahlul bid'ah, we are XYZ and we're haqq and there's the batil, and it's like, all right, I get where you're coming from. I appreciate the passion, but to quote mashallah Abu Osama al-Wahabi, he said to me, we've got bigger fish to fry and we've got harder nuts to crack. And rather than, I'm not saying don't focus on those issues, but rather than bring them into the public where people are already confused, because al-'amiyya la madhhab lah. In all fairness, as you mentioned, just to translate, the general average Tom, Dick and Harry in the ummah, he hasn't got a madhab, he doesn't know. All they know is amantu billah wa malaikati wa kutubi, the basic arkan al-iman, and that's enough. So rather than go into and asking someone, hold on a second, bruv, I get this question, I swear down, anytime I've had a live, where's Allah? And it's like, bro, come on, just leave these discussions. I mean, if I say anything which is contradictory to the Quran and Sunnah, please highlight it for my sake, so I don't have to go and stand in front of Allah as a sinful person. But where there's a grey area in some issues, just leave these issues.
Yeah.
And it just seems like a battle in the comments. To such an extent, I just stopped comments because it just started getting silly. So I'm just sorry, I've kind of, I'm doing a bit of venting here as well. But do you agree with my sentiment in the sense of that, or rather using that or leaning on the quote of Abu Usama, that we've got bigger fish to fry? I mean, why is it we're arguing over these issues when we can be focusing our efforts on the issues of talaq, the issues of the rise of Islamophobia, the issues of now protecting the sanctity of marriage, I mean, LGBT, identity crisis, and all these issues? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so again, there's a
lot of things I've said, I beg your pardon. I mean, I've thrown a lot in one sentence.
I think a lot of this comes down to historical ignorance as well. So these, yes, you'll find writings on part of the Hanabila and also the Ash'aris who fire shots at one another and completely discard one another, cast each other out of the fold of Ahlul Sunnah. But there's also instances within history where Hanbalis and Ash'aris have cooperated when fighting against the Tatar Mongols, attacking
even crusades like
even the crusade, Izzuddin ibn Abd Salam and
Maqdisi,
the Hanbali Maqdisis meaning Palestinians. There's even instances where Hanbalis and Mu'tazilis were friends with one another. So how does your worldview of casting the other out of the Ahlul Sunnah marry up with these instances where scholars cooperated frequently with one another? Yes, we're not denying that there were flashpoints within history where there was genuine infighting, even sometimes physical, but that doesn't discount the fact that that doesn't mean that it has to be this way for us in the 21st century. Now you correctly highlight that there are other theological challenges within the Muslim Ummah today that go well beyond the Ash'ari, Hanbali, Maturidi paradigm. You have issues surrounding gender identity. You have issues surrounding how our children are educated within the school system. You have issues surrounding how we view or how we treat the issues pertaining to Gaza and Kashmir and Democratic Republic of Congo and all these places, Burma, even India, mainland India, Pakistan, the Ahlul Sunnah in Iran, etc., Syria. How do we deal with all these things? So these are our priorities nowadays. To fall back on issues which have been on debates which are already mature. We're not going to move people. There's no need to have those discussions nowadays at the expense of challenges for which we don't have solutions for, or for which the solutions are not mature yet. So if you want to have a discussion on historical, theological debates, that's fine. In the appropriate setting. Nobody's forcing anybody or nobody's stopping anybody from adopting whichever classical theological view they want. And I myself have strong theological positions on the whole Hanbali, Ash'ari, Maturidi paradigm. But I don't let that get in the way of unity amongst people I have interactions with. And I also like to highlight that there are things that need to be prioritized nowadays. So
I mean, when you mention the word unity, recently we called somebody, I don't mean to mention name, Allah Ta'ala, hafidhahullah wa ra'ah, he's got his own position, and I respect him as an individual, and he's my Muslim brother, and I love him for the sake of Allah. But he declined because he asked some questions.
Decline what?
Yani to come and have a conversation, I beg your pardon. Yeah, we wanted to kind of like, we wanted to invite him. And he didn't ask what my stance was in terms of, like, he asked me questions on a theological basis, but he'd put two and two together because, like, for example, you studied in Dewsbury, so I make an assumption, okay, Ismail Ibrahim is a Maturidi because he studied in Dewsbury. Do you get it? Like, that's my man. He made an assumption about me without asking me a question and outrightly refused and then started giving me, and I appreciate the nasiha, mashallah, he was sincere. And I look at that because at least he's trying to give me some nasiha, but he didn't take the time to ask me anything. And he refused purely because he said, we can't sit with the likes of you because you're Ahlul Bid'ah. And unity can't be possible. You need to change your Aqidah. I'm like, bro, you didn't even ask me who and what I am. You just made an assumption. So when you say the word unity, someone's going to listen to that and say, these are just sellout Uncle Tom Molvies having a chat. Do you think unity can be achieved, or is that any unity to what extent? Because some people are going to hear this and say, no, it's our way or the highway. Do one. Unity can't be achieved at all. You have to come onto, and it comes from both sides. So what would unity look like not like in the sort of utopian way, because that's just not ridiculous, but how can we come to a place of tolerance? Let's use that word. A unity in some way.
That's a very hard question. I mean, if we had the solution, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. I would fall back on education. And by education, I mean education of history, how scholars have dealt with these matters. So again, circle back to the issue. Like, yes, there were flashpoints within history between between Sunni sects in the broader sense. So
yeah.
But there were also instances of great cooperation in the face of huge adversity between these scholars. So
when you mean cooperation, sorry, beg your pardon, are you talking about the wider even Mu'tazila and so on? Because I've never heard of, that's mad, like Hanabila and Mu'tazila. For those who don't know the Ikhtilaf, we don't need to open it, but that's a mad thing to think that they can cooperate.
And I'm firmly of the view, for our educational institutes, like I myself have strong opinions in Aqidah, but I'm also firmly of the view that within resources allowing, I'm firmly of the view that a single education system that teaches Aqidah should have 3 or 4 different strands of Aqidah training or teaching. The Hanbali strand, the Hanbali Athari Ahlul Hadith strand, the Ash'ari Maturidi strand, or you can teach them separately if you want, and the Mu'tazili strand. They should all be taught to students.
Yeah.
Now that might seem controversial, but especially for Hanafis, the study of Mu'tazili creed is essential, because a lot of Hanafi luminaries in the past, especially Usulis, they were all Mu'tazili.
Okay, that's
they were all
a really
Mu'tazili.
Important point. I mean, I know.
So once Muhammad al-Hasan died, and the fitna of the Khalq al-Quran started a couple of decades after that, all the Hanafis who were employed by the state, who were appointed by Abu Yusuf al-Qadi, the Chief Justice, they all fell in line under the Mu'tazili tendencies of the Khalifa and his Mu'tazili ministers. All the judges were forced to be Mu'tazili. All the teachers was supposed to be Mu'tazili. Anybody surrounding the Khalifa was supposed to be Mu'tazili. Look at all the initial Usuli writings within the Hanafi school. Jassas Mu'tazili.
Yeah.
Karhi Mu'tazili.
His name,
no, it's fine.
Yeah.
Saymari Mu'tazili.
Yeah.
These guys are the people who created Hanafi Usul, to be honest. Yes, later on, the Maturidis within Central Asia who weren't affected by I'tizali creed, they had their own Usuli sub-school, so to speak. But the majority of Usuli discussions we discuss nowadays is from the Iraqi, Baghdadi strand, which was affected by I'tizal. So for Hanafi especially, but I would say for students of all schools, study of, even on a historical level, study of Mu'tazili creed, Mu'tazili history is essential. And I think this element within our education is very much neglected, and that this gives rise to a number of ills. Number one, a lack of awareness of our history. So as you say, so if someone hears that the Hanabila and the Mu'tazila were friends with one another, they even cooperated with one another on certain issues, they wouldn't be heavy-handed in matters like we see nowadays, because discussion on theory is very dangerous without understanding how it plays out in practice and also how it manifested in history. And the other benefit of studying the history and the beliefs of i'tizal is that we don't fall into the into stereotyping the Mu'tazilites for certain things. So for example, the Mu'tazilites have been grossly misrepresented within all theological schools. So centuries upon centuries of writing within the Ash'ari Maturidi books and within the Hanbali books ascribe positions to the Mu'tazila which simply aren't true, like denial of adhab al-qabr, denial of certain positions within the theological landscape, which, yes, you can say one or two Mu'tazila denied this, but within the Mu'tazila there's sub-schools as well. So you can't generalize about the Mu'tazila either. So I think you can end up with strong opinions within Aqidah, that's no problem. But I am strongly of the view that Mu'tazili is a fully mature theological school, just like the Ash'aris, Maturids and the Hanbalis. It should be taught, and I think that will help a lot alleviate the theoretical disputes that we have nowadays. So
to learn it for the sake of understanding the origin and how it plays out in the world, or to, some people would say, yeah, learn it just to rebuttal it. I mean, so which angle are you coming from?
You can't regulate people what they end up believing. So if a person is strongly of the view of the Athari side of Athari creed, you can't expect them to subscribe to Ash'ari Maturidi theology. If someone's on the Ash'ari Maturidi side of things, you can't expect them to subscribe to the Hanbali theology. If you're going to teach Mu'tazili creed, is there a danger that a student might fall into i'tizal? Yes, there is that danger, but I think the option should be there. The solution isn't to remain ignorant about i'tizal. The solution isn't to remain ignorant about Mu'tazili history. So what are we scared about?
I think what it is, I agree with, it's a very interesting point.
They get a bad rap. The Mu'tazilis get a really bad rap. Even though, yes, you know the whole Imam Ahmad thing and the emotions rise up, but
that's why as soon as you say that, that's quite an interesting point.
The Mu'tazilis had political power in the time of Imam Ahmad, but they survived up to the end of the 5th century. And they have a lot of writings that come after the whole mihna of Imam Ahmad. So these people were not on the fringe, in the very least. They were not on the fringe. They were part and parcel of mainstream Muslim discourse for the best part of 300 years. In spite of the whole thing that happened with Imam Ahmad and the Mu'tasim and Wathiq and the Mu'tazili Wazir Ibn Abi Du'ad and all these guys. i'tizal is part and parcel of Islamic history, and especially Hanafi history.
So could you argue from that aspect then, because of the obviously when I say Shia again, it's very broad, very different categories, so it's not just to, but would that not be an idea to also study that side of the Aqidah as well, or to learn more about that, considering that
resources pending,
big percentage of the Ummah even till today are following the Shia creed?
Absolutely. I think again, there's many strands within the Shia itself, so to graduate with no awareness of how Shi'ism operates, the history of Shi'ism, the subsects within Shi'ism, so the Ithna Ashariya, the Seveners, the Fivers, the Zaydiyya, as they say. There should always be a purpose behind why these things are educated, and it should reflect the needs of people nowadays. So for example, if someone's living in a non-Shi'i, where there's no Shia, then obviously there might not be a pressing need to teach these things. But now that we live in a global village, it's no longer really an excuse to say that we don't need to study the other because we're never going to interact with them. This isn't some homogeneous society where there's only We're not living in medieval Central Asia where there's only Hanafis, Maturidis. We're not even living in early 20th century, late 19th century subcontinent where there's only Hanafis. To have that model of education, religious understanding, fatwa giving imported to the 21st century in the UK, 21st century USA, 21st century Europe, 21st century North America, even South Africa, where it's mostly Hanafi, I would say that's a completely incorrect transportation of religious thinking. I would say our situation nowadays is more aligned to Mamluk Egypt for 500 years ago, where there was a multitude of madhahib. There was a multitude of even theological strands. And our situation nowadays is more aligned to them. Their modus operandi within the religious subjects, especially fiqh, but also to an extent aqidah and other issues. Our situation nowadays is more aligned to that rather than our inherited models from the subcontinents, which we are ethnically affiliated to. Coincidentally, just to move the discussion on a little bit, I myself am coming to an increasing awareness of my ignorance. The more I study,
absolutely, yeah,
the more I'm ignorant. I'm not talking about generally within the Islamic sciences, but I'm talking about the Hanafi madhab specifically as a Hanafi. So we all say obviously the Hanafi madhab is the most diverse and has the most amongst the Islamic within the Muslim global population. But we represent only one ethnic strand of Hanafism.
Yeah. Turkey has its own,
Turkey?
Yeah, very unique.
Russia?
Yeah.
China?
China more Hanafi, I thought it was Shafi'i.
No, China's Hanafi.
Okay, I didn't know that. I thought they got influenced more from Indonesia sides, but yeah,
No. Balkans?
Yeah.
And then you have the Hanafis of the Arab world, so Egypt, Syria, and Ahsa, the eastern side of Saudi Arabia. Each of these represent distinct strands within the Hanafi school. So traditionally you had the Iraqi Hanafis and you had the Central Asian Hanafis. Nowadays you also have these strands, and by nowadays I don't mean 21st century, but I mean the past 500-600 years. And unfortunately there has been, these strands have developed in silos. So there hasn't been much sharing of information or transfer of information amongst these strands. So I, as a Hanafi, don't know much about the Hanafis of Qazan or the Hanafis of Bulgar. I, as a Hanafi, don't know much about the Chinese Hanafis. I, as a Hanafi, have limited information about the Balkan Hanafis and how they developed, how their fatwa progressed across the centuries. So I think this is a black hole within our understanding of the Hanafi school, because just as studying the theoretical side of the Hanafi school or fiqh in general is important, likewise understanding how fiqh plays out in practice and the local dynamics or the regional dynamics of that, how that plays out, that is as important. So if one studies one strand of a certain school, like the Hanafi school in this instance, one can become very easily narrow-minded. So if, for example, you go to Russia, they might have a completely different dynamic as to how they approach certain issues, how they issue fatwa. That might be completely different from how things are done within the subcontinent. Can we seriously say that the subcontinent Hanafism is the best out of all Hanafi strands? I don't think we can say that, and that's actually a form of Hanafi subcontinent exceptionalism. That we are the most correct in how Hanafi madhab should be practiced, and others are incorrect. I think that's a very dangerous way of thinking. And I think that that shows an ignorance if we go down this route. Go down this route on our part, that an ignorance on our part that the Hanafi madhab has to be homogeneous, it has to be manifested in this way. I think it would be really beneficial somewhere down the line that this transfer of information starts, and we start these interactions much more with one another. Mm-hmm. So recently I was studying the whole issue of Isha within Russia. So you know the mas'ala that's discussed in the Hanafi books, that the people of Bulgar, mm-hmm. meaning Volga, Volga, do they have to read Isha because there's no the twilight doesn't disappear within the summer months. So this issue was relayed to who? The scholars of Bukhara, Samarkand, Central Asia, yeah. where they weren't affected by this issue, and they said that faqidu sababi la yusalli as-salah, faqidu sababi as-salah la yusalli as-salah. So a person who doesn't find the time of salah, the reason of salah, which is the time, doesn't have to read salah. Yeah. This issue was relayed back to the Muslims of Bulgar and eventually Kazan, which is slightly north of Bulgar, and they didn't read Isha for 600 years.
600 years?
600 years.
Oh, okay.
Until scholars like Abdul Nasir al-Qursawi in the early 19th century, and then after him his student Shihabuddin al-Marjani, who wrote the famous Nadhuratul Haq, they said, okay, we need to reinvestigate this. We need to start reading Isha. And there was pushback against them. They said, why, you're fitna mongers. Mm-hmm. Why are you going against precedent? So he was forced to write a book on this topic, Marjani, the Tatar scholar, which is published, Nadhuratul Haq, you might have heard of it. في فرضية العشاء وإن لم يغيب الشفق. That Isha is wajib even if the twilight does not mm-hmm. disappear. So slowly but surely, Isha was slowly reintroduced within that region. But you can see how that fatwa affected Muslims for so long. Mm-hmm. And that fatwa came from an external source, which is Bukhara, Samarkand. It's like nowadays we go back to Deoband or Saharanpur or Karachi to get a fatwa, when they don't know necessarily our local local dynamics here. Yeah. So and that fatwa persists within the Hanafi school. So that fatwa was reproduced within Hanafi books that were written in Egypt as late as Tahtawi 250 years ago. They're completely unaware of the dynamics within Russia. Mm-hmm. If this position was put to the scholars of Bukhara, Samarkand in this manner, that your fatwa will result in Muslims within north of you, within Kazan and Bulgar, they're not going to read Isha for 600 years, would they seriously have passed fatwa in that way? I don't think they would have.
No.
I
mean, I'm shocked to even hear it. Subhanallah.
I was shocked to read it.
I haven't heard of the book firstly. I mean, and to hear that.
I was shocked to read it. And wow. Information about this is primarily within the Tatar or Russian language, but it's been recently stuff like this is translated by Orientalists and historians doing that work. So it's not us Hanafis that are at the forefront of this sharing of information, but rather it's Orientalists working in Western universities. They're coming out with all of this. And by the way, just a side note, those scholars who said we shouldn't read Isha, like Abdul Rahim al-Bulghari, he was at the forefront of that. They weren't irreligious people. They were completely religious, and in fact, they were so religious that on the whole issue of tashabbuh, they said we shouldn't copy the Russian imperialists on anything. We shouldn't drink tea like the Russians do. We shouldn't have sofas and chairs within our houses like the Russian kuffar do, and all this stuff. So these people were completely religious people, and these discussions were happening amongst them. So it's, you can immediately see there's a similar dynamic within the subcontinent, within the colonial period, where certain scholars said you shouldn't study English, you shouldn't send your kids to university.
Even attire as well.
Attire. So that is all affected by local religious dynamics, which might not necessarily be the case for the Muslims of Turkey, for example.
Yeah.
Or for the Muslims of China, the Hui or the Uyghur.
Yeah.
So to be so one-sided in terms of your perspective, without the ability of even taking into consideration what other Hanafis said, let alone other madhahib, what other Hanafis said. I think that's a really dangerous way within our modern world.
Yeah, you said something. Obviously, that's a really fascinating point. I think look from the word of unity. We've had this discussion. I think it would look good as a model to definitely have more of a acceptance and understanding of the four madhahib, and within the wider school of the Ahl Sunnah, yani Athari, Ash'ari, Maturidiyya. The only thing I think I'm finding a little bit uncomfortable is the idea of exposing people too much to the I'tizal creed. But I hear where you're coming from
in an educational setting. In an educational setting, and even if
if you allow me just to finish that point, I mean, from a historic point of view, especially because after, you notice this in the Banu Abbas period, there was that period in the Mihna of Imam Ahmad Hanbal. So it's interesting to study the history, and I mean,
it's not as if the Maturidi Ash'ari institutes they teach Hanbali creed.
No, they don't, and that's the truth.
Yeah,
I agree with you 100%. So I would like to see that at least to start off with at least the wider Ahlul Sunnah, and within the four madhahib, let's go with that start, and then people would have an appreciation of the formulation, but definitely study history in terms of how.
History is very much neglected.
Yeah, it's extremely neglected.
I speak from my own experience. Dewsbury and Medina, they were both faulty in this regard. That we weren't exposed to as much study of history as we should have been.
Yeah, I can also, obviously being through the madrasa system, other than studying basic books like Qasas al-Nabiyin by Abu al-Hasan Nadwi rahimahullah ta'ala, there was not really much history per se, unless you cover it in the Kitab al-Maghazi of Imam Bukhari. Otherwise, there's not really much history. I mean, I'm really tempted to ask you now about, because believe me, right, if you look at the questions I was supposed to ask, I mean, subhanAllah, I haven't even asked you anything, but this has been a fantastic discussion so far. On that note of history then, what books would you recommend, if you were giving advice and nasiha to layman and public, where would you say is a good starting place to start learning history then? What books, in your humble opinion?
I don't know.
Okay, this is a new book that's come out recently.
History is such a wide and expansive subject. There's multiple entry points
definitely
into the whole subject.
I mean, I've got something I can... Futuh al-Sham. It's 800 pages by Waqdi, just on battle,
Did he write it?
Well, it is ascribed to him. I mean, wallahu alam.
Okay.
Well, Allah knows best.
Yeah.
But then you've got like the Tarikh of Baghdad. That's just Baghdad alone, and how many volumes? I think that it's a good start. I mean, wallahu alam. I mean, it could be an idea to start learning about the Sahaba and then go on from there. That's why I was asking for books, because there doesn't seem to be too many in the English language that I've come across. That I've got some, mashallah, like you. I don't know if Lost Islamic History is a nice book. I don't know if you've come across that, and some other sort of primers. But I really wanted to get your take on that, really.
But in educational settings, I really think Ibn Khaldun should be taught.
The Muqaddimah or the whole Tarikh?
The Muqaddimah, obviously. The whole Tarikh, it can't be taught, but it should be part of research.
Supplementary reading, at least.
Supplementary reading or research module.
Yeah.
Definitely.
There is a book,
and it was traditionally taught in some places, I'm sure, but
even Tarikh al-Khulafa, maybe, or
we don't even study the Tarikh of the Khulafa.
Yeah.
We barely study the Seerah.
True. Definitely, I think that's true. There is a book which has come out recently by one Pakistani scholar. He's affiliated to Jami'atul Rashid, Maulana Ismail Rehan. I don't know if you come across that, Tarikh Ummat Muslima. It's written in the Urdu language. I mean, it's from what I've seen of it, it seems quite a promising book, and he plans to continue his work in history. I believe now he's on the 7th or 8th volume, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I know 6 have been published, and he's continuing to work on them as we speak. That seems to be quite a promising book, wallahu alam. Promising in the sense that he's... History, I mean, it's hard to say relying on authentic sources, because, the state of history, I mean, there's... it's not always so authentic. But I think he's, from the little I've read of a couple of volumes I've got, I plan to start and finish the whole lot, honestly, if time's on my side, which it never is. But I found it to be quite easy to read and mashallah easy to digest, from what he's presented so far. So I think that's it would be a great khidmah for someone to consider doing that in English. But
as I mentioned, there's so many entry points into history.
Yeah,
I'm speaking specifically in relation to, as part of our discussion, the history of Aqidah, how Aqidah developed, the history of fiqh. Now, the history of fiqh is known in the Arab world, which we studied in Medina, as Tarikh al-Tashri'.
Yeah, okay.
Tarikh al-Tashri' as a subject only rose 150, 170 years ago from Egypt.
Right.
So, yeah, that is quite a beneficial subject to study for any person who wants to go into fiqh.
I think that would be a very, very good
Tarikh
subject to study.
al-Tashri' is very important.
A bit more of a appreciation for the depthness and richness of the other madhab. I think that would be a very good thing to study. I mean, I personally read history because I find the Sahaba so inspiring. I mean, Hayat al-Sahaba is one book. Suwar min Hayat al-Sahaba by Abdurrahman Pasha. I mean, subhanAllah, I found, especially these two books, I mean, I can read it and I have hair standing up the back of my neck. But there are some other small books I've come across. I mean, I'm really, really fond of the Crusader period, Crusades. Reading a little bit about Salahuddin and, Ruknuddin Baybars of the Mamluks and so on. But I read it for inspiration.
I'm interested in where things went wrong within Islamic history. So
I think because it wasn't. I don't know.
The reason I say that is because, I mean, you just gave a talk on Hijrah recently.
Part of it was
yeah. So many Muslims, especially the youth nowadays, have a utopia.
Yeah.
About Muslim history and the Khilafah. And that utopia ended when Umar radiallahu anhu was martyred. Even in the time of well, obviously is the Khulafa al-Rashidun, but I'm talking about that period of ultimate Islamic stability ended when Umar radiallahu anhu was martyred.
Yeah, that's when the fitna started rising.
Then Uthman, he wasn't as firm as Umar, and he had to appoint Banu Umayyah amongst within the major positions. And in the time of Ali, Uthman radiallahu was martyred, obviously. Then in the time of Ali, he had the whole. He had to deal with the Shia and Khawarij at the same time, and also the civil wars amongst the Muslims. But aside from that, Banu Umayyah, the Abbasids, later on the Mamluks and the Ottomans, there's so many things that went wrong. Like Khulafa killing their brothers or their sons, refusing to marry in Andalusia, refusing to marry free women, so lest that their in-laws get a influence within how the state is run. So they wouldn't marry. They would simply have slave women. They would procreate, and the children would simply be. Their mothers would be slave women. The leaders of Andalusia, Ottomans. You know how we have a romanticized view of the Ottomans, but in reality, you had Ottomans killing the Khulafa, killing their children, having wars with their brothers, etc.
Even the fall of Spain itself,
even in Mughal India. Even in Mughal India, I mean, there's a lot to be said about certain Khulafa. I'm not going to mention names, otherwise I might be lynched. But you had all these things going on. So what utopia are you talking about? So again, this lack of understanding of history gives rise to this utopic thinking. Now, this is how it should be. No, we have to live within our ground reality, and we have to assess the situation as we live it and offer solutions accordingly. We can't necessarily re-engineer society in the way we like to. So we have to respond to the challenges which we're faced with.
Which is a mammoth task, man. I think we one sheikh who visits locally, he did his PhD on fiqh al-aqalliyat, yani the fiqh of minorities.
Some people even deny that as a subject. That's another issue. They say there's no such thing as fiqh al-aqalliyat.
Okay, wallahu alam where they're basing their thinking on, but I think that's a really important subject that could be entertained a little bit more at least.
Fiqh al-waqi', fiqh al-aqalliyat.
Exactly, understanding the ground reality of what's happening as we speak now. But I'm conscious of time because I think we've been about an hour, and for some, generally, I mean, this has been quite a bit more of an academic discussion.
Fire away.
I mean, I wanted to ask you. I mean,
quick fire.
because there's some questions I wanted to ask you, but I wanted to ask you. But you became a research analyst. I mean, how did you get into that? So the reason why I'm asking specifically because one of the crises or problems I see is a lot of graduates from madaris, from Islamic study university backgrounds, they graduate and then their options are limited. So although I appreciate that there is a need for solid imams who can dedicate their time, and I appreciate that model, but then there's another one as well, is that I feel that as du'at, ulama, and people that are involved in and their passion is there, I think in my humble capacity, I think that it would be a nice idea to see them duly educated so they can earn a respectable living, maybe even just dedicate part-time there. Like that's what I do, Shaykh. I mean, I alhamdulillah, I work as a therapist. Now, it's not the best paid, and you couldn't do it 40 hours a week because you'd go bonkers anyway. But I said I'm going to do maximum 16 hours, then I spend 3-4 hours of CPD and this and that. I would not go beyond 20 hours, and the rest of my 20 hours, and I can dedicate, like sweat-free for my Islamic study side without there being any sort of worry about how I'm going to pay my gas bill when it comes through my doorstep or on my door. So what advice, because you got into becoming a research analyst, what can you share with people that if they're listening, they think, okay, I can take a leaf out of that book? Like to go and study further or even share about how you got into it?
Yeah, so when I was in London here for 5 years, that's when I got the job. So I was attending the office.
Okay, how did you get in though? Because your master's degree was in Islamic studies, right?
My master's is in law. In SOAS.
Okay, right. I should have asked that question first. And that's how you became a research analyst.
Yeah.
Right, Teague. Okay, I get it.
So, I mean, when it comes to jobs in the city or anywhere else, they want, well, back then at least, they wanted to see you had a master's at least to get into that type of job. So any graduate, I would recommend them to at least diversify their education, get a degree from somewhere, or an apprenticeship even nowadays, as in the UK, speaking about in the UK context, and try to become independent of mosque committees, madrasa committees. Do your Islamic work, but try to be independent when it comes to your mosque and stay away from those politics, so you can speak your mind.
Yeah, definitely.
And you're not compromised by agendas and religious politics.
Yeah. This is a discussion I plan to have with somebody to bring on, by the way. A whole discussion.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, let's look at this historically. I mean, nowadays there's a rhetoric that we condemn families for sending their clever students to university and their less clever, children, clever students to university, put them through education, and they're not so clever children to Darul Ulum or Madrasa. And this is generally frowned upon within religious circles. Now, if you look at this historically, look at the madaris of the medieval period in Egypt, in the Nizamiya colleges, even Turkey, even the Mughal Empire. Those students were on stipends.
Yeah, and they had a waqf system as well.
They had a waqf system.
Yeah.
So they would attract the cleverest, the most clever children of families, and they would train up within the Islamic disciplines, and after that they would be guaranteed jobs as muftis, as qadis,
as well,
as state administrators, as ministers, as part of the Islamic state.
Yeah.
That dynamic has been lost in Turkey, in India, and especially us living in the West.
Yeah.
So we can't expect ourselves or Muslim families within this country or in this era to emulate what occurred before. So it's inevitable that people follow where the money is.
Yeah.
So we need to manage this situation somehow.
Yeah.
I was going to mention something else, but I forgot.
Well, look, the question was about, I'm just looking at time as well, is about what advice can we give to ulama? I mean, one thing you did, if you allow me to ask a question, I would rather like a bit of clarification for this myself. I mean, someone asked me what to get into, and I don't advise them to jump straight into a master's from the Alamiyya if they're studying the Alamiyya, especially not. Because what happens is they get this false thinking that I just got to go in, do a master's, and then I'm going to walk into a 30k job. When they ask you, what's your undergrad? And they say, hold on, mate, where's your undergrad? And then you can't get any funding, it becomes a problem. So my advice would be for those who have not studied from a kulliyah and their bachelor's is recognized, whichever discipline, if they've got a bachelor's that's recognized, i.e. Medina, Qahira or whatever, then at least they can go into a master's. But if you're from a Darul background, you need to be doing a bachelor's, mate. And you need to then go and do. That's what I was thinking. So would you agree with that?
Well, I mean,
Markfield's cool. I get Markfield's cool. I'm saying, but would you? What my point is, if you do a standalone masters just on an alamiya that's not recognized, just that standalone masters, do you think that will get you anywhere?
If you got a recognized masters, then it works.
You think so?
Depends what your masters is in again. So.
Fair enough. Okay. I don't know, I'm somewhat leaning that I would like to people to get a bachelor's, have a good solid undergrad in something, and then specialise and then do the masters. It's only from what I face. I'm going by my own personal experience.
This goes back to the whole discussion of how long the alamiya should be and what you should be, should be teaching, what we should be teaching alamiya. I personally think 6 years is too long. Forget Dewsbury where it was 8 years. 6 years is even... I think that the alamiya course should be made more modular. So I don't think we should be going by with studying the Kutub Sitta in the last year. I mean, if someone wants to specialize in hadith, then that should be a standalone specialization, 1 year course.
Yeah.
So my idea of a educational Muslim educational utopia would be 2 years Arabic and foundational sciences.
Yeah.
Then 2 years intermediary. So that's 4 years.
Yeah.
Then that's enough for you to be a madrasa teacher, imam in a mosque.
Yeah, you've said something interesting.
Then after that, 1 year or 2 years, your specialization in fiqh or your specialization in aqidah, specialization in ulum al-Quran and qira'at, specialization in Arabic language, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think the alamiya course for the 21st century, especially this country or anywhere in the West, should be radically revised.
Yeah.
I think we're wasting too much time. We're not efficient at all. We've made changes here and there, but it hasn't been that reform that addresses the needs of Muslim society and also allows graduates of these seminaries to progress in life. 6 years is far too long. And it doesn't allow them to get those jobs that they need in order to survive basically in life. And people are going to get married. If you're in London nowadays, does it make economic sense to send your child to Leicester or Dewsbury or Blackburn?
Disaster.
It doesn't. It doesn't even make sense to send them to. Well, it might make some sense, but it doesn't make much sense to send them to Qahira or to send them to Medina, to send them to Lucknow or Karachi or South Africa or whatever, where their degree would be ultimately recognized in this country. So I think there needs to be a radical, not just tinkering around the edges. There needs to be a radical rethink about what Islamic education should be in the 21st century in the UK, in the US, in North America.
It's a fascinating discussion.
That's why
I'm so tempted to talk more on this.
I think you need to invite someone like who's in an education degree like Sheikh Shaheen.
Shaheen, I'm going to call out Shaheen. If you're listening
to
this,
I'm just an enthusiast on this. I'm not a specialist.
I'm going to grip him up on this. You know why? Because I'm going to say this point and come to an end, right? Because if you pick up some of our books of even subcontinent, you hear these words like munshi, khatib.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be an alim. Is like someone, okay, you got the alamiya, then you have your muftis and qadis, right? But I completely agree with you. I had this discussion in one Darul Uloom in UK. I mean, they literally brushed it aside like I'd lost the plot, because I was saying the same thing. Have 2 years like your munshi course. I don't know what you want to call it, but your basic 2 years. Then you have your next 2 years, and they can be your maktab teachers. They can be your basic Maulvi Sahib, your Imam Sahib, you get my man to do that. And then you have your 2 years more, and that's your specialization for the people who are more seasoned in fiqh and the other sort of things, and your specializations become the qudat and the judges and so on. But anyway, I just know, I thought, okay, I'm not gonna. It didn't happen, and they unfortunately didn't even get entertained. So it's a fascinating discussion. I thought I was somewhat alone in this way of thinking, and then but it's nice to know that, mashallah, we got at least, alhamdulillah, there are others thinking like this. Because I do feel that although I appreciate my time studying, I do believe that there are some things that
when you were studying, even when I was studying 15 years ago, it's a completely different dynamic to what it is nowadays.
100%.
We can't. It will be wrong for us to impose or emulate the models we went through on students nowadays.
I agree with that.
I think it's a total injustice on students nowadays to have imposed upon them the models that we went through.
But I think I'm going to leave it there because this is a fascinating discussion to have, and you've already plugged the Sheikh Shaheen, right? So I hope he listens to this because I'm going to send him a link, and we're going to grip him up inshallah and ask him to come along,
get him on,
and have this discussion. But Sheikh, I say thank you and I appreciate your time. Believe me, if I tell you the bullet points of some of the stuff I was going to ask you, we've covered 2 and the rest I've not. But alhamdulillah, this has been quick fire. We're not going to be able to get into it because Salah is happening in a few minutes. But really, I appreciate your time, and it's been an interesting discussion. Alhamdulillah, I do appreciate that it's been for my sort of audience. For some people, they might find that quite academically, looking over some of the things might be a bit of a challenge. But I believe it's been a very rich and fruitful discussion, and inshallah, I'll be accompanying you to the bayan, and we'll also have a bite to eat later on, so we'll continue this discussion there, inshallah, bi'idhnillah.
Thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate your time and your help. But on that note, guys, I'm going to finish here. I mean, not that I want to finish here. It's only because Dhuhr is around the corner. Otherwise, I wanted to continue this discussion on. But inshallah, I hope and pray that there's been a source of benefit and khair, and it opens the minds a little bit and kind of appreciate the richness, the vastness of education we've got out there. So many things I really wanted to ask more, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet. I was aiming for an hour mark, so we will leave it here. Make dua for myself, make dua for the Shaykh who visited, and for our cameraman, who also, mashallah, makes a lot of effort, and all the brothers that are supporting the da'wah. The place where we're using now, mashallah, is also supported by a brother. Alhamdulillah, make dua for him, his family, that Allah give barakah to him. And on that note, we'll finish. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.